Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy President. This plan before our chamber today to fix the inequities in our education system has been needed in this nation for a very long time. We have had rampant inequity and inequality take hold with no plan to address it until now. But I'm very pleased to say that through the Gonski review, this Labor government has been working very hard on getting the solutions in place. But this inequality has come at great cost to the nation, and it is time to do something about it, and it is time for this Parliament to do something about it. And that is why it is very important that these changes pass this week. When you look at the impact of inequality in our nation, it is profound. Today, the wealthiest 20% of Australians own 61% of the nation's wealth, and the poorest 20% own just 1%. And this is something that is reflected also in our education systems. We are a good deal less equal than countries such as Japan, Sweden and Norway, which have also far more equal education systems. And we are one of the most unequal developed countries, keeping company with the US and Britain. And this inequality is embedded in our nation's education system. And so addressing inequality is a key in education, is certainly a key to fixing our education system. And on that note, you know, what we know from looking at education around the globe is that more equal education systems, systems that remove the inequality and give all students an opportunity, have much better educational outcomes. It is proven fact globally that this is the case, that nations that have more equal education systems do better. They have much better education outcomes overall and as a whole. So the current inequality comes at a great cost. So we've needed a plan to fix this for a long time. A lot of the inequalities in our education system have begun and have been driven by the way our education system is funded, and it's time it was fixed. So I'm very proud to have in this place an opportunity to do that today. I note that when this plan passes, some 60% of the nation's students will be covered, but I think it is important that we see this nation realise 100% coverage. And on that note, I really want to see Western Australia come into this scheme. It's critical because while WA is reasonably well resourced, we're as a whole closer to the student resource standard than some other states, it is the most disadvantaged schools in my home state that do not meet the resource standard put forward in this model. To my National Party colleagues across the chamber, Madam Acting Deputy President, it is rural and regional students that are most disadvantaged currently in Western Australia. And these are the students that would benefit from being brought into this model. So the Labor government is serious about education reform in Australia. It is about time we had a fair funding system in place so that every school, regardless of their state, regardless of the sector that they're in, gets the money they need to do a great job. Regardless of location, many rural and regional schools, schools in remote communities, schools in disadvantaged suburbs. And the cost of inequality is great. And I'd like to quote Dr. Carmen Lawrence, who's been a significant contributor to the discussion around education equity and was indeed on the Gonski review. And she said in an article to the Monthly last year, she said, in Australia, almost 80% of students from the lowest quarter of socio-economic disadvantage attend government schools. The drift of students and resources from government to non-government schools has accelerated here in the last decade or so and further concentrated wealthier students in the private sector. As a result, there are more schools with very high proportions of students from disadvantaged backgrounds, mainly in the government system, and more with higher concentrations of the most advantaged, mainly in private schools. This is not about class warfare, as the opposition claims. It is not about envy. Far from it. Far from it being about the politics of envy. It is about all parents wanting the best for their children. It is about making sure that no child in this country, in the school that they're in, is getting left behind. Parents want choice, but some parents have no choice, and those choices are being taken away by the inequities in our education system. It is time to make sure those students aren't left behind. And I will give you a very clear example of how our country's students are being left behind. Dr. Lawrence went on to say in this article, in one country town in Western Australia, the local government high school lost ground dramatically after 4 private schools were opened. The most disadvantaged children were left behind with fewer teachers per student than in the new private schools. The total cost of education in the community skyrocketed without any aggregate improvement in children's scores on routine tests. Now, I'm not saying that it's a bad thing for new schools to be opened in communities, far from it. But what I am saying is that it is absolutely immoral to leave those students behind who have no education choices, those school children that will inevitably have less choice in their education. Every student in this country deserves those choices. And, you know, parents making hard economic decisions in their household, they deserve the choice between a good private school and a good government school. That is the option that we should be giving students and families in this country. Because 1 in 12 Australian students currently aren't meeting minimum standards in reading, writing and maths in our country. And many of these students, you know, we've got a good deal of them in WA. So I really want to see Western Australia become part of this plan, because I think this plan has the potential to see our classrooms in the top 5 in the world by 2025, because it is a plan to properly resource all schools, all our children, teachers and classrooms for generations to come. It is something that will see, you know, the bedrock of education in this country meet the kinds of quality standards that we expect, the kinds of quality standards that are comparable with the best performing countries around the globe. And without these reforms before us, there is no plan to do that. The National Plan for School Improvement includes a new funding approach to make sure we get these things right. It responds to the problems in the system. In our plan, every state, every sector will see increased funding and more support for students in the classroom. And I note, Madam Acting Deputy President, that Senator Mason's looking for a guarantee about no school being worse off. Well, we have made that commitment. As a bare minimum, we want every school in Australia to receive its current funding, plus indexation of 3%. This is not a competition between education sectors. We are simply wanting to make sure that no student gets left behind. Schools that need more support to support their students will get it, irrespective of sector. And we are prepared to guarantee this, and we are asking the states and territories to do the same. And today, I ask Mr Colin Barnett to do the same for Western Australia's students. He has now but a few days left to sign up to this deal, to get lined up by the 30th of June to make sure that Western Australian students also have the opportunity of fixing the problems in our education system. The plan that we have before us responds to the needs of states like WA, who have higher costs attached to delivering education in our system. And as I said before, where the problems are in WA are in where we fail to meet the student resource standard is most profoundly in disadvantaged communities and in rural and regional areas. And this is where the funding under this model is targeted. It's of great benefit for Western Australia, and it's time for Premier Barnett, in my view, to accept this offer. It is time for all schools in Western Australia to benefit from a fairer and more stable school funding system. Under the offer that we have made to Western Australia, that's embedded in the plan before us, we have total funding growth for WA of $2.8 billion. That's $2.8 billion that I know would make a massive difference to Western Australia, to Western Australian students. I'm pleased that the offer was increased because this $922 million that's on the table will go a very long way. So that's $922 million under this current investment plan. And then we've got the indexation, which will also see funding in Western Australia continuing to grow. Indexation that needs to be locked in by both the Commonwealth and the states coming to an agreement. The Commonwealth is making a commitment of indexation of 4.7%, and we're asking the states to commit to 3%, so that both sectors are playing their part, both state and Commonwealth are playing their part in seeing education funding grow in our country. We want all sectors having the extra resources for our nation's schools that need it. And I don't think, Madam Acting Deputy President, that school principals, that teachers around Western Australia, I don't think they think that locking in funding growth of around $2.8 billion is a bad deal. It's a good deal, and it's a well-targeted deal, and it will make an enormous difference to Western Australian schools. It makes good sense for WA. And I note, Madam Acting Deputy President, that there is a decrease in funding that would have occurred under the previous model when it stops. WA will receive the same funding guarantee that we gave to New South Wales. That means every year they will receive an increase in base funding. And what we have currently is a very volatile education funding system. The model introduced by the previous government sees indexation declining, and it sees it falling a further 3%. This deal means that Western Australian schools have more funding year on year on year and have more certainty and more confidence about funding. So schools in Western Australia will be benefiting from this new suite of reforms if they come on board, and it is high time that Western Australia did. All schools in WA need to move on to a needs-based funding model consistent with the school resource standard to make sure that students in Western Australia don't get left behind. I'd like just to contrast what we have before us in the opposition's alternative non-plan for education, Madam Acting Deputy President. Education spokesperson Mr Christopher Pyne for the Coalition has confirmed that the Coalition want to keep in place a broken school funding model, a broken model that could see up to $5.4 billion cut out from Australian children. He has dismissed the findings of the Gonski Review, which was very strongly welcomed right around the country by the education community. And I know this from talking to the Primary School Principals Association, where you have teachers, school principals from all three sectors, Catholic, independent and government, working together, and they all told me that the system was broken and that they were committed to seeing progress made on these questions. Now, they're working across sectors to say, yes, the system is broken and we want to be part of the solutions. But Mr Christopher Pyne has not listened to schools and parents around the country. The Coalition, in fact, has a plan to sack 1 in 7 teachers, a plan to squeeze more kids into classrooms and to slash funding to disadvantaged schools. Mr Pyne has said that teaching quality would be his highest priority. I can't see how that can possibly be the case, because the Coalition has in fact announced they would cut $425 million out of the Teacher Quality National Partnership. They said that in the 2010 federal election. So if that's how Christopher Pyne treats his main priority, how will he treat the rest of the education system? So, Madam Acting Deputy President, in closing today, I just want to be able to acknowledge the amendments moved by the Greens and to say that these amendments would create legal uncertainty in respect of the affected parts of the bill and include in the bill matters that the government thinks are better addressed in regulations. And I also note that putting these information requirements in the Act rather than leaving them to regulations would likely increase the complexity of the Act, and that's something the government doesn't support. Further, one of the government's key concerns also is that there has been considerable buy-in from different parts of the education sector, from government schools, from non-government schools, from Catholic and independent schools, to get them to support these reforms, to make them to get them to buy in and to kind of get their support for a path forward. And at this stage, the government thinks that these amendments would represent a threat to that goodwill that we have generated in terms of being able to move forward on these very important questions. And that's why the government will not be supporting these amendments. It also has concerns that this level of detail in primary legislation would limit capacity to amend the requirements to respond to the changing needs under the bill through future regulation, because it will start to create contradictions in the Act versus the regulations. So, in closing, Madam Acting Deputy President, what I want to say is we cannot let this current broken system continue. It is doing a great disservice to the nation's students. It is driving inequities in our education system, and it is driving down education standards. It leaves hundreds and thousands of young Australians behind. Many in government schools, but also in schools in the Catholic and independent sector who will get extra resources under these reforms, all of whom deserve the resources and support that come with this legislation. And we know, on the other hand, that Mr Christopher Pyne and Mr Tony Abbott have no alternative plan for school funding that fixes these inequities. Only a plan to maintain a broken system that is doing a great disservice to our nation's children. Maintaining a broken system that will see schools lose $16 billion in 6 years. No school will be worse off under the current model, they say. Not true, as the current system sees many schools go backwards, especially the most needy, and that is what we aim to address in this Parliament today, and I commend the bill to the Senate. Thank you.